Now we'll lift the hood and begin the inspection of the engine compartment. Inside the engine compartment, we'll be looking for several items on both sides of the engine. First, we'll identify the water pump and check that it's securely mounted and isn't leaking. There should be no missing bolts or parts. All hoses should be securely attached with no visible leaks. Identify the alternator and make sure it's securely mounted and that there are no bolts, nuts, or other missing parts. Check the condition of the wires to make sure they're not frayed and have good, tight connections. The belts should not be cracked, frayed, or broken, and should not have more than 3/4 of an inch of play. Next, we'll move to the oil dipstick and inspect the engine's oil level and condition. Note the location of the oil dipstick and the oil fill. To check the oil level, remove the oil dipstick and wipe off any oil with a clean cloth. Replace the dipstick and then remove the dipstick to see the engine's current oil level between the add and full marks. While checking the oil, note the condition of the oil on the dipstick. This oil appears normal in color and has no metal shavings. Here you can see the front of the frame and the beginning of the exhaust system from the engine. We'll discuss the frame and exhaust system in more detail when we get to the back of the cab. We'll move over to the coolant reservoir to check the level of the coolant. Caution should be used any time you remove the coolant cap. Make sure the engine is off and the coolant has cooled in order to prevent the spraying of hot coolant when the cap is removed. Some trucks have coolant reservoirs where you can see the coolant level through the plastic reservoir or sight glass. Make sure all of the hoses are securely attached and there's not coolant leaking from the hoses and all clamps are tight. Next, locate the power steering reservoir. Inspect the item to make sure it's mounted securely and is not missing any bolts or nuts. Check to ensure that any hoses are securely attached and there are no leaks. Also, check the level of power steering fluid. The next item we'll inspect is the air compressor. The air compressor supplies the air pressure to operate the air brakes and any other pneumatic or air-powered items or systems. The air compressor should be securely mounted with no missing bolts, nuts, or parts. Identify whether the air compressor is gear-driven or belt-driven. This air compressor is gear-driven, but you'll see a belt attached that drives the air conditioner unit. If the air compressor is belt-driven, check the belt for cracks, fraying, and proper tension. Check the air lines connected to the air compressor for air leaks and ensure that the lines are securely connected. Right here is the air governor, which turns the air compressor on and off to maintain proper air pressure. Identify the steering gearbox and make sure it's securely mounted with no missing bolts, nuts, or parts. The steering gearbox contains the mechanism to transform the steering column action into wheel turning action. Check the condition of the lines and hoses and look for leaks from the lines, hoses, and the gearbox. Now we'll identify and inspect the components that make up the steering linkage. The steering linkage function is to transmit the steering action from the steering gearbox to the wheels. It's made up of the following items: the pitman arm, the drag link, the steering knuckle, the tie rod, and the tie rod ends. Check that each of these items is not cracked, bent, or broken. Ensure the joints and sockets are not worn or loose. Make sure the castle nuts are tight and the cotter pins are in place as shown.